Hello!
What's going on, MDF?
Welcome back, viewers and listeners, to Mostly Dead Folks, the history podcast about lives of the past and the way we keep them alive today. I'm your co-host, Joshua Stern.
I'm Brian Dunn.
And today, in honor of Women's History Month, we're going to be looking at some lesser-known female figures. Of course, there's so many important women throughout history, but some of these stories that you might know, for instance, Marie Curie or Amelia Earhart, or of course, everyone's favorite woman who never existed, Helen Keller.
Oh, geez, don't get me started.
I don't understand this conspiracy theory. I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that kind of rub me the wrong way.
Right.
But this one in particular, I think, really gets your goat.
Yeah, it's ableism. It's really the idea that somebody with disabilities cannot accomplish great things. And again, she has been recognized. We have video proof of her overcoming her disabilities.
She's
of course,
in the Statuary Hall in Alabama.
Yeah, and I just mentioned to you that that is the only statue that you are allowed to touch because, really, again, cool. It kind of echoes to her life. And so, again, it's garbage. If you guys are out there, we would love for you to challenge us, but you're going to lose this. You're going to lose this.
But here's the thing, I teach the Holocaust, and no one in my class, thankfully, but there's still people out there who, despite all the evidence, all the video, all the photos, it was exaggerated or it didn't happen. You can lead the horse to water, right? You can lead the horse to water. Yeah. So we're not going to talk about that conspiracy theory any further. What we're going to be doing is sort of looking at two women who were more behind the scenes in many ways, or lesser known women who in their own way enacted some great historical change or were of historical importance that we can maybe draw attention to. So I believe Brian's going to go first for us today.
So my person is Edith Wilson. Do you know that name?
I don't.
Edith Wilson. Well, I mean, one thing is she was the first woman to have a driver's license in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. And you would think that's enough, right? That's a quite accomplishment.
What year are we talking? I'm sorry to interrupt.
So we're talking 1919-ish areas where I'm kind of starting my story. But of course, Edith Wilson is the wife of Woodrow Wilson.
I didn't realize her name was Edith. I had thought about going...
Second wife.
Oh, second
wife, yes.
Really?
Second wife. Previous wife died.
Okay.
And then shortly after, he meets Edith and... the romance starts. And I
was going to say Reagan and Trump are the only two divorced presidents. Anyway, continue.
So Edith Wilson, the wife of Woodrow Wilson, and why I wanted to recognize her, and this is kind of a controversial thing, and we can kind of, say, well, was she kind of standing by her man and taking care of her husband when he was most needed, or in need of her, or was it a power grab? That's kind of still debated to this day, and that's what I wanted to get into today. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, Woodrow Wilson, famous for what? What would you say, Woodrow Wilson?
For me, it's the 14 points,
yes.
League of Nations, post-World War I.
Exactly.
We need to come together and make sure this war thing never happens again.
So I love that you said the 14th points, League of Nations, because again, how our American system works is when a president signs a treaty, they have to bring it back home, and Congress has to approve that treaty, or else it doesn't go into effect. Well, he goes, and he has a hard time, especially with the Republican Congress at the time, to get this approved. Yep. And it's kind of funny because technically we're still at war until this treaty gets approved. So he goes on this 29-city tour in 1919 to try and, again, get the American people to call their congressmen, telegraph them, write letters. I want you to be on board with the Treaty of Versailles.
And let me just say, I think one of the reasons for our viewers who maybe aren't as well versed in history as we are, is that this was sort of the breakaway from this kind of isolationist idea. Yes, America had just joined World War I, but here's Woodrow Wilson proposing an international coalition, something that would involve America much more prominently in the world, and this angered the wing of Republicans we would call isolationists.
But also the fact that it would have taken away, technically, the power for Congress to declare war.
Yes.
Because now you have an international body that could suddenly kind of pull America into another war if need be. And so Congress is like, wait, we just lost one of our constitutional powers. So it was very controversial at the time. Woodrow Wilson, he's determined. This is like his baby to get this done. And while he's on this tour, he's in Colorado. He had just given a speech, and suddenly he collapses. And they say, okay, we got to cut off the tour, bring him back to Washington. And it's while he's in Washington that he suffers a stroke, and Edith walks in and finds him lying on the floor. And he suffered a really bad stroke where the left side of his body was entirely paralyzed.
Oh, wow.
And he lost vision, I believe, in his right eye. It was devastating. So now, what do you do? Because he's in his second term.
Sure.
Does he resign? Does the vice president take over? It's this whole controversy. And Edith, his wife, is like, no, I'm going to convince him to stay on the job. He can do it. Mm-hmm. This is where it kind of gets interesting because she becomes kind of the gatekeeper to Woodrow Wilson. She is, again, is this overstepping or is this just I'm an advocate for my husband? But this is pretty big because she does screen who is allowed to see the president, and she screens the memos and any communication, be it from Congress, be it from the cabinet. And again, a lot of power goes into this.
And of course, she's unelected, right?
Right. No, exactly. So Edith is kind of an interesting person. Let me just back up for a second because she wasn't what you would say your traditional first lady in the sense of like fancy dinners and like meeting with children and stuff. Because again, this was during World War I largely. And so she was backing the Red Cross. She volunteered for the Red Cross.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She again inspired Americans like, look, I, the first lady, a wealthy lady, I am even going to cut back in terms of rationing and whatnot. So she did all of that. An interesting thing, though, that she was against was suffrage, actually.
Really?
Yes. So it's kind of interesting. Here's a woman that is, as I'm going to tell my story, taking power, political power, and yet she was kind of against
the idea
women.
Of being the right to vote.
And so keep in mind, guys, that when we're talking about this is she is going to be basically the secretive president, as she's technically known, still to this day, arguably the first woman president.
Sure.
For 17 months.
That's
she's
right.
going to have that role. Yeah.
It's more than a year, yeah.
But more than a year. So now, again, in that role, she is going to, you tell me if this is a power grab, she's going to push for the removal of the Secretary of State, who is Secretary of State Lansing, because at one point he called a cabinet meeting without the president and without notifying her.
Ooh.
So, like, again, there's a power grab right there. And she's like, what? You did this behind our backs? Like, you should get going. He also wanted a British ambassador to remove an aide who spoke ill of her once. She also made notes and suggestions on his papers, so kind of put her 2 cents into pieces of legislation, memos, you name it. And then, again, this is a big one. She saw classified information, too. Telegraph messages that were deciphered and everything like that. So with that, again, this is a pretty controversial thing. Now, later in life, Edith would go on to say, quote, I myself never made a single decision regarding the disposition of public affairs. The only decision that was mine was what was important and what was not, and the very important decision of when to present matters to my husband. So
it's a sticky wicket. That's a tough one.
It's an interesting one, especially since, and again, this goes into the question of should he resign, because a Burt Park, a neurosurgeon, later on looked at his medical records after Woodrow Wilson died sometime later, and he said that it was determined that Woodrow Wilson had disorders of emotion, impaired impulse control, and affected judgment. And so again, who was really calling the shots? Was she just kind of looking at her frail husband and saying, I got this, I'll handle this? And so again, how much was the country in
There have
control?
been a couple of questions, of course. Reagan, in the end of his second term, suffering from what we now know was Alzheimer's.
Yep.
Of course, most recently, Joe Biden, towards the end of his first and only term, suffering from this sort of question of who is ultimately in charge. And now this is, of course, before it's the 25th Amendment, right, that allows for the removal of the president. Surprised that amendment wasn't kind of brought up for Woodrow Wilson.
And again, we've had this before with like James Garfield, for instance. they would say, look, he's literally like dying on a bed.
Like a month to die, right?
But they would say that his faculties were still there and that he was able to kind of still, be with it mentally. Well, here, Woodrow Wilson sounds like he's not.
Yeah.
And so she's literally dragging him across the finish line. Wow. So I just wanted to kind of recognize Edith Wilson. Again, controversial figure, possibly. Was she just kind of saying, no, you know what? The American people elected my husband for a second term, and by God, he's going to finish that second term.
Wow. Behind the scenes, but maybe more in front of them than history would know.
There you go.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with a bit of local history here. Have you ever heard of the name Laura Kofi?
It sounds familiar, but go ahead.
Her full name, I should say, is Laura Adorker Kofi.
Okay.
But she went by the name, or title, I should say, Mother Kofi. At one point in her life, her chosen title was, quote, Warrior Mother of Africa's Warriors of the Most High God. You're intrigued now, aren't you?
This is starting to sound familiar.
So this was a woman, and so we'll call her Mother Kofi for the sake of this. She was born in Ghana at the end of the 1800s, and she suffered from an illness. We don't exactly know what it was, but a terrible illness to the point where the villagers, it is rumored, were preparing her funeral pyre.
Okay.
It is said that she heard voices and saw visions that compelled her to rise from her supposed deathbed and come to America, which is, great. Yeah. I mean, so how she got here is a little bit of a question. Regardless, she comes to America, and this is at the moment of the rising of what we call the Pan-Africanism movement, which I'm sure you're familiar with. This is most famously led by Marcus Garvey. The idea of Pan-Africanism is that whether you are black in America, whether you are black in Cuba, whether you are black in Poland, be it as it may, you are all connected by your birth nation or your homeland, as it were, of Africa. Regardless of where you are born, you are African, and there's this connection here. Of course, as we know, during early 1900s America, this is perhaps the most racist and violent time regarding black rights in American history. Mass lynchings, no sense of repercussions, the peak of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, and it's in this context that you have this figure, Marcus Garvey, who becomes the most prominent leader of this Pan-Africanism movement. He naturally is drawn to this woman, Laura Kofi, who comes to America with sharing a very similar goal, being from Africa herself, settling in America. She sees this connection, and she sees this kind of transatlantic connection. Right. It's really the salvation for black people in America, which, as we saw, tremendously violent and difficult. This is where, of course, the Harlem Renaissance comes from as a sort of a refuge away from this violence. So they make fast friends. She ultimately becomes the national field director for Marcus Garvey's, quote, Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA. This organization was way ahead of the curve. If you go to Google today, you can list businesses that are black-owned, woman-owned. Regarding the black-owned business, this idea of supporting black culture by supporting black entrepreneurship, that is something Marcus Garvey really, really believes in. He creates the Black Star Lines, which is a shipping company. Fun fact, the flag of Ghana today has a black star on it from Marcus Garvey's Black Star Lines. Nice. And she's essential in helping to recruit members to this and to spread awareness of the UNIA. However, she's such an eloquent speaker and such a powerful figure that she starts gathering a following separate from Marcus Garvey. She starts attracting people by the thousands, it is rumored, to religious sermons that she leads. Now, depending on who you listen to, there's a split between her and the UNIA. Now, Marcus Garvey's followers say she was embezzling money. It is rumored that she paid, and I say rumored because a lot of this isn't documented, or the documentation isn't necessarily well preserved. A lot of it's based on hearsay. It is rumored that she had been collecting $19,000 in 1926.
A lot of money.
A lot of money. I think adjusted for inflation, it's a couple $100,000. While she was not actually a member of the UNIA. So she was accused of embezzlement by Garvey. He quickly distances her. Her followers would tell a different story. They would say he was jealous or intimidated by her own sort of passion. Another thing, the UNIA was secular. They did not believe in bringing religion into that organization, and she was an intrinsically religious figure. Regardless, there's a split. In 1928, on March 8th, 1928, after speaking in front of thousands in Detroit and Chicago, she founds the African Universal Church, which some see as a challenger to the UNIA. And so again, on March 8th, 1928, this is her first speech as a member, as a leader of the African Universal Church, as she approaches the dais in Miami and starts reading from the book of Isaiah. She is shot in the head from a distance by a man that we believe, there were 3 men, 2 escape, but one man is caught. He was 33 years old. His name is Maxwell Cook, and he didn't go to jail. You know why he didn't go to jail? Because the parishioners grabbed him and, according to accounts, beat him to death and mutilated his body out of sheer anger for the assassination of Mother Kofi. In a church, mind you. How interesting, the book of Isaiah, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's an Old Testament book.
It is.
This is a very Old Testament way of meting out punishment. There is no redemption for Mr. Maxwell Cook.
No, turn the other cheek on that.
Absolutely not. The anger. So this in and of itself, we do know that he was killed. The details are a bit, blurred. But the fact that he is, killed by vigilante justice on the spot tells you the kind of passion Mother Kofi really engendered. There's a fight over where her body should be entombed. Should it be in Tampa? Should it be in Atlanta? Or should it be in Jacksonville? So her body lays for 5 months in repose, being kept really religiously, to use an appropriate expression, by a caretaker who every day is trying to preserve this body in 1928 from the heat, the tropics. I know it's so there. This fight to where should we give a permanent home to her takes on new meaning, and ultimately she is entombed right here in Jacksonville. You can visit her tomb. I have done it. There's a small white tomb. It's in the Old City Cemetery, right behind the Jags Stadium. So this is part of what's called the east side of Jacksonville. This used to be a flourishing black community. In the 1970s, the government, or 1950s, the government blew through it with the highway. Desolated the area, including the historic east side. Now this once great cemetery is kind of derelict, but her tomb is still there. It's all white. There's a little plaque dedicated to her. And actually, after her death, a South African follower named Eli Nyombolo founded a town called Adorkaville, named after her, on the old Kings Road area. He opened a 1,000 square foot sanctuary to serve as a dedication to Mother Kofi and her martyrdom. Tragically, in many ways, like the east side of Jacksonville, Adorkaville has fallen into disrepair. There's very little left. Apparently, there's an area off the old Kings Road, you can still see some of the original wooden crosses that were erected there in the 1940s that are now overgrown. She was buried in front of 10,000 mourners, and to this day, on March 8th, every year, followers who are still part of the UNIA, or what used to be the UNIA, and what used to be her church, I want to make sure I'm not mispronouncing it, the African Universal Church, I missed that there, will still gather at her grave to pay tribute. So for me, I think a local person that's kind of been obscured by history, Mother Kofi, perhaps one of Jacksonville's most important exports.
So why did they go with Jacksonville out of all the
It was where she had spent the duration of her life in America, though she did spend time in New York and Chicago and other places. She always called Jacksonville home. So,
they thought it was fitting.
For a city that's best known for being the home of the Jags and Limp Bizkit, it's nice to have at least another name to add to the pantheon of Jacksonville greatness. So I went with Mother Kofi on this Women's History Month, and you can visit her.
I'll have to check
small
that
white
out.
tomb.
You said it's behind the.
It's very close. It's within 5 minutes drive of the stadium. It's in an area that's been bisected by highways and just really depleted over years. But I think that it's a fitting, well, not fitting, but appropriate tribute to the fact that it's kind of hard to find this gravestone of this woman who would have been a legend. at the time if you went back to the 1920s. So a sad story of the divide between her and Marcus Garvey, but ultimately a story, I think, of power and redemption and the legacy of Mother Kofi. So that was my pick for this week.
That's a great pick.
Yeah,
that's a great pick.
Two really very different.
Yeah.
You went political history, I went with social history.
Yeah, there you go.
We meet in the middle in the end.
And this is episode 10, by the way.
It's episode 10.
Episode 10.
We've made it.
So this is kind of like,
we've done it.
You know, like Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money? This is MDF episode 10, The Search for More Subscribers.
Come on, subscribe.
So,
look, this takes a lot of work and time, people.
Yes.
We need your subscriptions.
And look, we've upgraded. Now we've got this
no more
fancy
blurriness.
screen.
Now I'm saying this before we go into post-production, so it might still be blurry.
Yeah.
But our fearless producer Max is going to take care of that for us.
We're trying.
And we hope you've been enjoying everything. We're going to end with a question. It's my turn to ask a question to Brian. This comes from the upper school. There's a couple of them that I gathered.
Okay.
But I'm going to ask you one here that I really, really liked. Outside of America, so non-American, what is your favorite cultural tradition of another nation? This could be food, religious, musical, whatever it may be. What's a cultural tradition outside of America that you like?
You know what because I teach world history, and I've got to bring up, this is the first one that popped in my head for some reason, is the Festival of Holi in India, where, if you don't know, they gather kind of like dyed powder, and then everybody kind of gathers and they throw it up into the air, and it's a celebration of the spring and life coming anew again. And so it's just kind of a fun little, happy. There's nothing. It doesn't really, as far as I know, it doesn't relate to some historical event or anything. It's just kind of a tradition that is done there, and it has gone international, so I think they do it like in California, they do it in other parts of the world, because again, it's just fun. You gather around, you get a little dirty, it makes beautiful images. Like, you can Google this, I think it's spelled HOLI, and you can just Google that and you will see beautiful images, cool images of just people covered in all sorts of different colors. And again, it's to recognize the spring. That one, for some reason, popped in my head.
There's something about vibrancy.
Yeah.
It's a gray day here, so maybe the colors.
Maybe that's...
Similarly, I mean, there's a lot of great traditions. I've never been a part of it, but I'd love to do the Tomatina in Spain in July, where basically you have thousands of people who gather and literally throw tomatoes at each other.
Yes.
It's just, you probably see, you can Google it, Tomatina. Yeah. I don't know much of the history of it. Yeah. I think it's one of those traditions that probably began, I would imagine, as sort of a farmer's, a harvest festival would be my guess, and like most things in Spain, has rapidly become just a massive party. Though the idea of someone just whipping a tomato at your head, I imagine could cause some serious dental work. Maybe, you lose an eyeball, something like that.
How do you explain that to your dentist?
Yeah, hey man, I went to Tomatina. Oh, I see. The Spaniard would get it.
Hockey player? No, tomato.
No. Running with the bulls, another one, though I think the running with the bulls is utterly insane. Tomatina to me is a little bit more good, clean living, if you will. Even
just funny, because we both went with dirty, kind of like...
It's because we're wearing our business attire. We just want to get loose, everybody. So we would love for you to subscribe so that we can, perhaps voyage to these places. Maybe go to India. To MDF.
Are you kidding?
Why not?
Are you kidding?
Let's go.
Are you kidding?
Hey, whoa.
Because we are so high budget here that now you're talking about we're going to book a trip to Spain.
You never know. You never know. Anything can happen. Anything. You said last episode that with God anything is possible. Yes. Perhaps without being sacrilegious, with MDF and our subscribers, perhaps then anything is possible. And before I get any hate mail, I'm going to sign off for today. I'm Joshua Stern.
I'm Brian Dunn.
And we thank you for watching and listening. MDF, Mostly Dead Folks. We will see you next time. Take care.
Take care.